You all see my screen? Thumbs up. All right. If anybody can't, please, please take yourself off of mute and let me know. So the first thing that I wanted to just let you know is how this project is rolling out. And so in the past few months, there have been a couple of things that happened. The Planning Commission submitted their recommendations on this project. Notification was sent out to Tacoma residents in June and July. And on July 13th, there was a City Council public hearing. And City Council then met that following week on July 20th to then kick the policy to a council committee review process, which is where the policy is living right now with the Infrastructure Planning and Sustainability Committee. And the goal there is to have final recommendations, so edited and reviewed recommendations based on the Planning Commission's recommendations, back to full council for action in sometime in the fall. And we're actually thinking that that's likely going to be in October or November. All of that is part of phase 1 of Home in Tacoma. And then if council does choose to pass phase 1 in that October or November range, then they would then be moving to phase 2 next year for 2022. And that's one of the key things that I want to make sure you all leave this presentation understanding is that phase 1, everything that the council is debating right now falls into what I would call visioning. And so this is really broad public policy guidance about what the potential growth model for the city could look like. So that's what they're really talking about now, is what could or should be changed to accommodate housing growth and housing choice. The phase 2 work, which would be happening in 2022, is really what you would talk about as implementation steps. So actual zoning changes, where upzoning would happen, how that would happen, what affordability incentives would be included in those, what design review process would look like. All of those details will be covered in phase 2 of Home in Tacoma. So if it's the details that you're really concerned about, those aren't actually what council is debating right now as part of phase 1. And those will be going through a much broader engagement process through all of 2022, should council again choose to pass something around phase 1 this year. So with that, the Home in Tacoma project is really about supporting housing choice, supply, and affordability. And the reason why that's the project goal is this fits under a broader umbrella that the city calls the Affordable Housing Action Strategy, which is comprised of 24 different actions that fit under 4 different objectives. Like I said, solving or addressing the housing affordability crisis is not an easy thing. That's why nobody has really been able to do it. And it requires a lot of different interconnected actions happening at the same time in supportive ways. So the 4 Affordable Housing Action Strategy objectives are: number 1, creating more homes for more people. So just recognizing that we're not going to be able to really address this crisis if we don't address the housing supply issue and create more homes for more people. At the same time, we have to keep housing affordable and good repair. The best way to create affordable housing is to keep affordable housing. And so preventing what is currently affordable from becoming unaffordable is the second main objective. And the third is to help people stay in their homes and communities. So thinking about how we're supporting individuals who may be facing a housing crisis in the form of rental assistance or utility assistance or property tax support, or all of the different ways that you can provide things like tenant protection services and things of that nature. So how are we helping people stay in their homes and their communities is the third objective. And finally, the fourth objective is to reduce barriers for people who often encounter them. So thinking about high-risk populations like those experiencing homelessness, how do we actually reduce barriers to stable housing for people who often encounter them? So those are the four main affordable housing action strategy objectives. And the Home in Tacoma project is nestled firmly in objective number 1. It is about using the city's ability to work on zoning and development policies to facilitate the creation of more homes for more people. And apologies if you all hear my kids yelling in the background. I have all my kids home with me today, no camp or anything, so should be fun. And just want to let you know what that sound is in the back if you hear them. So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I do want you all to see that when we analyze what the housing need is in Tacoma, what we see is that affordability is an issue across all income levels, and we see that in terms of cost burden for middle-class families as well as low-income families, but that cost burden is not shared equally across different income levels. And in broad brushstrokes, the more low income you are, or the lower your income is, the fewer housing opportunities there are that meet your housing needs, right? So you can see from that chart on the right that, you know, if you classify as low income, so 80% AMI or below, there's actually 87 affordable and available units for every 100 of those households. So still not enough, but it's not necessarily the crisis that it is when you look at very low income, which is 60% AMI or below, or extremely low income, which is sometimes categorized as 30% AMI or below. And you can see there's only 27 available units for every 100 of those households. So extremely different supply and availability from what the need is in Tacoma. So in addition to that, you all know that this is a hot area. Rents and mortgages in the Tacoma-Pierce County area have risen as fast as or faster than any other area in the country. We're always hovering somewhere near that upper teens, close to 20% year-over-year growth for some areas. And that's obviously not at the same pace of growth as incomes, which are stagnant at this point. So just doing the broad math of what does it look like when housing continues to grow at 15% year over year when wages do not? What does that mean for cost burden? What does that mean for displacement? And how do we actually do things that can potentially address that? So knowing that that is the need, what I originally said in terms of, you know, this isn't a silver bullet, is really to say that because this is something being felt across all income levels, talking about the meat of the Home in Tacoma project, which is about missing middle housing, which are duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, etc. Those don't solve affordability challenges, right? So nobody at the city is fooling themselves into thinking that once these zoning changes would potentially go into effect that we've solved the problem. That's not it at all. But it does help affect pieces of the problem, especially on the supply side. We have limited land. We are a finite city because of our water borders, etc. So we're not going to be able to keep sprawling out, right? So because of that, we have to think about how infill housing and missing middle housing can help us meet our long-term housing goals for the city. So in addition to those zoning changes, though, we know that they need to be coupled with affordability incentives, inclusionary zoning in some cases, and an anti-displacement strategy that works with that full range of affordable housing action strategy actions that I just talked to you about, in order to make sure that we're not just creating more housing, but when we're doing that, we're creating it at multiple affordability levels that meet multiple different needs. So our broad growth vision as a city is that we are growing, and primarily that growth is happening in centers. So those are what you see as kind of these pink areas that are cordoned off in the city. Those are our multi-use centers, and that's primarily where we're seeing multifamily units go up. And all of that light yellow area that you see taking up most of the city is actually residential single family exclusive detached zoning, which means that you can only have one unit of single family housing, which now has been amended to also include an ADU, or an accessory dwelling unit, or a detached accessory dwelling unit. So there really is, when you look at this map, limited area for mid-scale housing. If you want to build something other than a single family home, you really have to limit that right now to those mixed use centers, which you see take up a fairly small percentage of the city. So when we talk about missing middle housing, we're really talking about this whole section here in the middle, in between mid-rise housing on the far right and detached single family housing on the far left. And unfortunately, when we talk about housing policy, we tend to limit a lot of the policy to that far left or the far right. And that's because a lot of these middle options were prohibited through zoning in the 1950s. And for those of you that may have read the story in the New York Times this week that Dave Jones was in, you may have seen that home ownership rates differ greatly by race, with Black homeowners being the least likely. And part of the reason for that is the history of residentially restrictive redlining policies that explicitly kept non-white residents out of certain neighborhoods. And the zoning changes in the 1950s were in many ways an extension of limiting who could live in what neighborhoods. So by outlawing all of these housing types other than detached single family houses, there was an ability to create or maintain, I should say, economic and racial segregation, which we still see in the outcomes that we see in the city today. So there's renewed interest to look at affordable housing options in walkable neighborhoods, also in service to our broader goals of vibrant, livable neighborhoods that are racially integrated. And so, again, those are the housing types that we talk about when we talk about low scale and mid scale residential, which you'll hear me talking more about. Everything up to the townhouse in the middle there would be classified as low scale, and everything from the multiplex medium on would be considered mid scale until you get to the mid rise, which is really looking at oftentimes mid scale and beyond. So the missing middle area is what we're talking about when we talk about this. So I'm going to skip over planning engagement, planning commission engagement effort, and how community input shifted. I'm also going to skip over centers and corridors, other than to just quickly let you know that the Home in Tacoma proposed changes do overlay with long-term growth vision of transportation corridors, such as Pacific Avenue and 6th Avenue, and those mixed-use centers that we already talked about. So as I mentioned early on, phase 1 of Home in Tacoma is where we are right now, and that's the vision and policy for changes to the housing rules. So current rules limit supply, affordability, and choice because of the maintenance of exclusive single family zoning citywide, which again limits the ability to add supply and limits the economic diversity of what kind of units you can put onto the market. So this phase 1 also includes broad policy support to create mid-scale housing near shopping and transit, commits to design and standards prior to those zoning changes as part of phase 2, and commits to strengthen regulatory tools to promote affordable housing. All of that, again, is in service to prioritizing affordable housing, preventing displacement, and ensuring that our city is developing in an anti-racist way. That will then, if council should choose to pass phase 1 later this year, would take us into phase 2 next year, where we would implement those vision and policy choices through zoning changes, design standards, and specific actions to support housing growth through all of that list that you see there. And I did send these slides out, so I'm not sure if the organizers had a chance to send these slides out, but they're also on our website. If you go to cityoftacoma.org/home in Tacoma, you'll have access to all of these. So I'd encourage you to take whatever time you want to look at these details if I'm not spending enough time on any options that you want to look through at greater length. So when we talk about low scale, again, we're talking about duplexes, triplexes, and in some cases, townhomes. They support more housing options that are still at the scale and design of houses. So you can see here in this image what it looks like when you have an existing neighborhood with infill missing middle housing. And you can see in terms of the building envelopes, the heights, the setbacks, etc., all of these fit into the general scale of the neighborhood and the existing structures. So that's the goal, right? Is that things fit into the general scale and you don't have things sticking out like sore thumbs. Now, as you get closer to transit corridors, the medium scale supports more housing in walkable neighborhoods that transition between lower and higher scale areas. So you can see here on the right side of the image, right, that you're starting to get denser, higher building envelopes, more of a higher floors, right, 3 to 4 floors that don't necessarily line up exactly with the existing building envelopes that you see on the left that are traditionally 1 or 2 stories. So that's the difference between the low scale and the medium scale density. So I am going to show you the 2 scenarios that the Planning Commission put forward and just describe these to you briefly. They proposed to council these 2 choices. On the left, you see what they called evolve housing choices. And to explain the diagram here, what you see in yellow on this map represents a shift from what was exclusive single family zoning to what would be under this proposal low density zoning, so duplexes and triplexes. What you see in kind of that dark salmon color around the mixed use centers and along the major corridors is the medium scale. So that would be kind of your 3 to 4 story mid-rise apartment buildings, multifamily, slightly more dense housing choices. So in this evolve choice, you can see there's much more low density and some additions of mid-scale throughout the city. In the transform housing choices scenario, you can see in addition to the low scale being everywhere that it was in the evolve scenario, they greatly expanded the mid-scale areas in this transform scenario, right? So all of these salmon colors would represent, again, mid-scale zoning under this. In both scenarios, design standards would be part of this, and all single family becomes low scale, which includes single family, duplex, triplex, etc. So after looking at that, they merged those 2 and gave one final recommendation on this recommended scenario, which, as you can see, is kind of a compromise of those 2 scenarios. And again, the yellow represents low scale and the darker color represents expansion to mid-scale. And one other quick note is all those areas that are mid-scale can also accommodate anything below mid-scale, right? So single family homes are not illegal anywhere, and that's not becoming illegal anywhere under this. It's really about increasing flexibility, not limiting choice. So that's the map, and that's one of the things that that council is debating in their committee discussions leading up to that final vote this year, is kind of what are their policy guidance around this general map of low scale versus mid scale. So I've been talking about these housing types, but just in picture form real quick, you see the low scale housing here on the left, the low scale in some circumstances. So think about corner lots that might have greater square footage, for example, Those might be these fourplex and small multifamily examples. And then mid-scale would be more of your traditional townhouses, and sort of your small, medium multifamily that you see there on the bottom right. So hopefully that gives you a good sense, both with the map and these designations, of kind of what the changes with infill housing are being proposed would look like, with these being integrated into existing neighborhoods on the left, and these on the right being integrated along transit corridors. So I'll skip over this for the sake of time, because I really do want to give you as much time for questions as possible. But design and scale is something that's been really important to a lot of the groups that we've been talking about. And that includes a lot of different things. It's not just one thing. So it's about pedestrian orientations, massing and scale, right? What does it look like next to existing structures? Residential patterns, transitions, the appearance of density, the integration of shared spaces, green space, minimization of vehicular orientations. That means things like making sure that cars have spaces to be parked on the side or the back, as opposed to having all of the cars right on the street. Encouraging reuse of existing structures to minimize demolitions, and developing design standards for individual housing types so that we can reduce the cost to developers. So just a quick example of that is, legalizing ADUs throughout the city is great, but how can we reduce the barriers for, lower income folks to get into the development of ADUs on their properties through things like pre-approved design, designs for different ADUs, as well as rotating low interest loans. But again, going back to those design standards, that is something that we know is going to be very important to people buying into these changes long term. And this is just a little bit more about what that design review process takes into account, like the 6 residential patterns of Tacoma, which you can see there. And this is a little bit more about compatibility with front and rear yards, space between houses and setbacks, trees. So this is all to say that increasing supply and choice doesn't mean that we don't still have requirements that help us achieve some of our other goals around, urban forestry and walkability and neighborhood feel. So we want this to absolutely be a policy that gets us to a both and situation, as opposed to an either or situation. And when we talk about incompatibility, you can see car orientation here on the left. You can see setback differences here in the middle, and you can see scale and massing differences here with a 4-story next to a 1 or 2-story here on the right. So that's what we're trying to avoid in terms of incompatibility within neighborhoods. And compatible scale really looks like, no more than 1 floor of a difference between, structures that are next to each other, and building envelopes that still allow for residential patterns to be largely maintained. And these are a couple of examples of what that could look like in real life, both in Tacoma and beyond. And one of the things that we hear a lot is just, fear that these changes are going to happen really quickly. And I think you all know from the market that change with how the housing doesn't happen quickly. And that's one of the reasons why we have some of the affordability issues that we have. But I just want to show you here with this image that over time, you would see infill additions. So like if you look at the middle of the image on the right, you'll see add-ons in terms of infill housing without any demolition. And then on the right-hand side, or the bottom of that right-hand screen, you'll see that in some cases, as buildings either age out or have different potential uses, you could see redevelopment of properties, right? And so that looks like either additions in terms of square footage, or additions of floors, or redevelopment altogether. So that will happen over time, but it certainly will not happen, you know, over the course of 1 or 2 years. We would expect those to happen some over the course of several years, but really these are long scale, you know, decade long changes that we're talking about when we kind of flip this lever in terms of zoning. And similarly for mid-scale residential areas over time, you would again see infill additions in some cases, but over time, it is reasonable to think that we would see some properties age out or have better potential uses and be redeveloped over time. So the package includes a housing action plan, comprehensive plan policy changes, near-term code changes with accessory dwelling units, platting, parking, and bonuses, a state environmental protection agency determination, and commission findings report. So if you're interested in any of that in more detail, again, I'd encourage you to go visit the Home in Tacoma website. And I think with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and would love to open it up to some discussion if we still have time. I hope I didn't take up too much time, Sean, and thanks for letting me go through that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jacques. That was great. We're actually going to go turn it over to Jim Henderson real quick to give a little bit of a follow-up feedback on what government affairs is doing at TAPCAR. Then we're going to do some Q&A. If you can hang on for about 10 minutes, that'd be awesome. Thank you. So with that, again, remember everyone that's on the line here, if you have your confirmation email that you should receive this morning, or from when you originally registered, excuse me, you can find the link to our Slido page there where you can submit questions and also upvote other questions to get stuff bumped up to the top that you want to see answered. So with that, I'm going to turn it over real quickly to Jim Henderson. He's a government affairs director at TAPCAR, and I see Jim has his screen share ready to go. So Jim, take it away.
Thank you, Sean. And just as we predicted, I'd have a train coming through just at the time that it was my turn to talk. So thank you, Jacques, for sharing that information with us. So, you know, TAPCAR loves this idea of that we're building more than just housing. We're building community, and the Home in Tacoma project is an opportunity to. It's a long range opportunity, and we're going to have the opportunity over multiple years to look at areas in our city where we can create more housing to support residents that live here. And Tacoma's leading this program for not only themselves but also for the county. And it's super fun to be a part of this process as we learn about how to reimagine housing in a community that is highly desirable. And we have a lot of people wanting to live here, and we provide them a great quality of life, and we want to continue to be able to do that. And Home in Tacoma gives us the opportunity to increase the supply and the diversity of housing in Tacoma. And with that, we'll see different types of housing and offering different opportunities and for all scale of housing. So as part of our work, at TAPCAR, we'll also see that the opportunity here is in community and building community and partnering with community to support housing. And we're doing that by providing a platform that gives community members and businesses an opportunity to come together and to have a voice and to share and why they support housing in Tacoma. And here we've got several partners already confirmed and that have already joined on to our coalition. And we're talking with more and more every day that have interest in supporting more housing in Tacoma and supporting the Home in Tacoma project. I mentioned that Tacoma's leading this housing, not only for themselves, but also for the county. And through Tacoma's work in partnering with Pierce County through the South Sound Housing Affordability Partners. And it's called SHAPE. And they've been working on this and leading this coalition of cities since 2018. And today they're at the stage of bringing in other cities through intergovernmental agreements where they're working together to address the complex issue of affordable housing. So currently right now, cities are signing on and becoming a part of SHAPE to support this. There's also cities that are also developing their own housing action plans, and we see Puyallup is in the process of developing that. This morning I spoke with a council member from University Place, and they're in the beginning processes of also developing a housing action plan to address the housing needs for their communities. I think the one thing that was said today and that we recognize through Home in Tacoma, and SHAPE identifies this also, is that there's a need for housing, but we also have a need to be able to decide what that looks like in different communities. And both of these plans recognize that, and they allow for input and flexibility to address that. All right. Also at the county, something that we've been working on and tracking is the reported system statuses, the RSS. There was a period of time, partially due to COVID, but also part of just a volume where you were not getting these inspections done within a 10 business days. And through the work that TAPCAR has done with the health department, that is starting to meet the goal of the 10 days. The health department has committed additional resources and making that happen for us. And if you're seeing something different, or if you're seeing that goal of 10 days, and if you're seeing that it's getting shorter but then getting longer, please let us know. We want to be able to reach back to the health department and work with them and understand and provide input on how we can reduce the number of days. Finally, we talked about housing across all boards. We need more housing and more housing diversity, not only for home ownership, but also for rentals. And both of those markets are being impacted with a lack of inventory. Just want to share with you a little bit about kind of where we're at as a county and rental assistance. We've had to date, as of August 19th, there's been 14,000 applications for rental assistance submitted to Pierce County. Currently, right now, we're 85 days from when you make application to when the housing provider would receive funding based on that application. The average household is just under $9,000. And we've received in about $53 million of federal treasury funds and money from the state. And Pierce County requested an additional almost $20 million, which they've already essentially kind of shown by the dollar amount of applications and the trend of need that they're going to need. They will be able to use that money for rental assistance. So essentially that money's earmarked. So you can see that the need is pretty great. The Pierce County Rental Assistance team is #1 in the state for putting out money. And you may hear reports, there's one on NPR this morning, and then there's another one, I believe, in the Wall Street Journal. You'll hear reports about the money slowly trickling out. It is, but it's in Pierce County, we're doing better than any other county. And then finally, RPAC.
By a lot too, right, Jim? Like I think we've allocated 59%, and I think Seattle is at like 4% or something like that.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, King County is, the hose is off almost. They're and they have not done as well or even nearly as well. So yes, you're right, Jacques. We're at 59% of the monies that we've received, we have sent out. And remember, and just as a context, rental assistance has only been open since March. So this is a short window of time in which the rental assistance team has received applications, and then they've been sending out payments. So finally, RPAC, just want to give a big push and a big shout out for RPAC, investing in RPAC, investing in ways in which you can make a difference in supporting legislative efforts, all of this work, what we're talking about here today, what happens at state level, all of these things are go through legislative committees, and we support those efforts by supporting RPAC. So I'd encourage you to really look at RPAC, be a major investor, and go in and see on the Washington Realtors website, you can see the list of the major investors. You can see the levels of which opportunities to invest, and you'll see your peers and the commitment that they're making in RPAC and being involved in these efforts in which change outcomes in minds. So thank you. I will also be available for questions.